Hello, Fathom family, and thank you for taking the time to join and review this training. Today, we're going to walk through documentation expectations that come from a combination of law, MLS rules, and Fathom Realty policy. These expectations are designed to create clarity around representation timing, compensation transparency, and submission readiness so that there are no new surprises during the transaction process. Our goal is to help you avoid last-minute issues, reduce any back and forth prior to closing, and support timely commission processing. Everything that we are covering today is intended to help create smoother transactions and provide consistency across all markets. As the real estate industry continues to evolve, documentation standards have become increasingly important. Regulatory requirements, MLS rules, and industry expectations now place greater emphasis on transparency around agency, relationships, compensation disclosure, and accurate transaction records. Because Fathom operates nationwide, having consistent documentation practices helps to ensure that transactions meet both local requirements and company expectations. Clear documentation helps protect you, your client, and the brokerage, while also helping to ensure that commissions can be processed without unnecessary delays. Across the country, we continue to see similar documentation challenges arise. Timing issues are one of the most common. For example, representation agreements are sometimes executed after property tours have already taken place, or even after the contract has been signed. We also continue to see documents uploaded more than 48 hours after execution, which can create gaps in the transaction record. We also see compensation inconsistencies between documents or situations where compensation is renegotiated after contract execution. In some cases, transactions are submitted very close to closing, which may require expedited review or additional follow-up in order to issue the CDA on time. Incomplete transaction files can also create delays when key documentation is missing or inconsistent. These types of situations are usually preventable with early submission and clear documentation practices. Clear documentation standards help create consistency across markets and reduce uncertainty during the transaction process. They clarify expectations around timing, compensation transparency, and submission readiness so that agents know what is needed when it is needed. When documentation is clear and complete, it helps prevent last-minute issues that could delay closing or commission processing. These standards also help to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements and company policy, while supporting a smoother experience for both agents and clients. Continuing, clear expectations help reduce last-minute requests and minimize unnecessary back and forth prior to closing. They also help to create more predictable timelines for commission processing. When documentation is submitted early and accurately, it allows review to occur in advance of closing, rather than during the final days of the transaction. This helps create a more efficient process and helps to prevent avoidable delays. Ultimately, these expectations are intended to support agents and promote smoother closings. In this training video, we will review documentation timing expectations, representation agreement timing requirements, and compensation transparency expectations. We will also discuss submission readiness expectations, common mistakes that can create delays, and certain fees that may apply when policy requirements are not met. The objective here is to provide clarity so that expectations are easy to understand and transactions can move forward as smoothly as possible. It's worth mentioning, commercial transactions may be structured differently than residential transactions, particularly when it comes to representation agreements. In some commercial transactions, fiduciary duties may be established through documents such as a letter of intent, a purchase agreement, or a lease agreement rather than a traditional representation agreement. However, compensation must still be clearly defined and supported in the transaction file. Transaction documentation must still be complete and accurate, and transactions must still be submitted on time for review prior to closing or lease commencement. And a CDA is still required when applicable. Now, let's move into documentation timing expectations, which play a key role in ensuring that transactions can be reviewed in time for closing. Ultimately, submitting documentation early helps prevent delays and allows time to address any questions that arise prior to closing. At a high level, transactions typically follow a consistent workflow. First, the brokerage relationship is established. Next, the transaction is created in IntelliAgent. Documents are then uploaded as they are executed. Then, the transaction is submitted by the agent and reviewed by compliance and accounting. After review is completed, the Commission Disbursement Authorization, or CDA, is issued. Finally, the transaction closes. Following this process helps that ensure commissions can be processed in a timely manner.
Transactions should be created within 48 hours of establishing the brokerage relationship. Executed documents should also be uploaded within 48 hours of signing. In some states, local law or MLS rules may require even shorter timelines, so the stricter requirement should always be followed when applicable. Uploading documents as they are completed helps ensure the file remains current and ready for review. When a representation agreement is required, it must be executed before brokerage services are provided. The agreement should clearly define compensation and should be signed by all required parties. Having the agreement in place at the beginning of the relationship helps ensure expectations are clear for both the agent and the client. Brokerage services can include activities such as showing properties, scheduling showings, advising on specific properties, drafting offers, contacting listing agents, providing negotiation strategy, or coordinating transaction activities. When required by law, MLS rules, or company policy, these activities should take place after a written agreement has been executed. Representation agreements should be executed before key brokerage activities occur. This includes property tours, negotiations, offer preparation, and providing client-specific advice on a property. Executing the agreement in advance helps ensure compensation and agency relationships are clearly documented from the start. When a written agreement is required, it should be executed before touring properties or arranging property access. Providing property-specific guidance without the required agreement may create compliance risk. Agreements should not be backdated to address timing issues, and documentation should accurately reflect when services were provided.
Next, let's review expectations relating to compensation transparency and transaction accuracy. Clear compensation documentation helps ensure the CDA reflects the correct amounts and helps prevent delays in commission processing.
Compensation should be clearly defined in the representation agreement before brokerage services are provided. The compensation reflected in the transaction file should match the written agreement. Compensation accepted cannot exceed what was agreed upon in writing. Agents may reduce compensation if they choose, but increases must comply with applicable law, MLS rules, and company policy. Compensation cannot be increased after a property is under contract. Any permitted changes must occur before contract execution and must comply with applicable law, MLS rules, and brokerage policy. Ensuring the representation agreement reflects the final agreed compensation helps prevent delays during review. All compensation related to the transaction must be disclosed to the brokerage and reflected in the transaction file. All compensation should be included in the CDA. Compensation arrangements outside the transaction file are not permitted. Ensuring all compensation is documented helps prevent misunderstandings and supports accurate commission processing. Transaction records should be complete and consistent across all documentation. Compensation should align with the representation agreement, and the sales price should match supporting documents. Referral fees, team splits, and commission advances should also be documented when applicable. Complete and accurate records help prevent delays and reduce the need for follow-up prior to closing.
Continuing down that road, let's now review submission and review expectations that help support timely processing. Submitting a complete file early helps allow time for review and helps prevent last-minute issues.
When possible, transactions should be submitted 5 to 7 business days prior to closing. At minimum, submission should occur at least 3 business days before closing to allow time for review. Submitting earlier helps reduce the likelihood of delays and allows time to address any questions before closing. After submission, continue monitoring emails in case additional documentation or clarification is requested. Responding promptly helps ensure the review process can be completed in time for closing. If updates occur after submission, uploading revised documentation helps keep the file accurate. Follow-up may be needed when submissions occur close to closing, when documentation is incomplete, or when key transaction details change after submission. Clarification may also be needed when compensation, referrals, or payout structures are updated. Providing requested information promptly helps prevent delays. We will now review certain fees and compliance violations that may apply when documentation expectations are not met. Understanding these items helps agents avoid unexpected issues and helps support smoother transaction processing. When documentation expectations are not met, additional review may be required, which can impact commission timing. In certain situations, fees may apply as outlined in the schedule agreement and policies and procedure manual. These policies are intended to create consistency and accountability across transactions. An expedite fee of $100 per transaction side may apply when expedited processing is required due to late submission, incomplete documentation, or last-minute changes requiring urgent review. This fee does not count towards the plan cap and may be deducted from commission. Submitting documents early and ensuring accuracy helps avoid situations that require expedited processing. A compliance fee of $400 may apply when a transaction closes without a CDA being issued prior to closing. This typically occurs when required documentation is not uploaded in time for review. This fee does not count towards the plan cap and may be deducted from commission. Submitting documents early helps prevent this situation. Fees are generally not applied when circumstances are outside the agent's reasonable control. Examples may include company error, last-minute closing changes, or high-volume processing periods. These provisions help ensure fairness when delays occur due to factors outside the agent's control. Certain compliance violations may be subject to a progressive disciplinary structure. A first violation may result in a $150 fine. A second violation may result in a $500 fine. A third violation may result in a $1,500 fine. A fourth violation may include commission forfeiture. Examples of violation may include executing a representation agreement late, compensation exceeding the written agreement, undisclosed compensation arrangements, or inaccurate documentation. Touring properties without a required written agreement may also create a compliance risk. Incomplete or inconsistent transaction records may also require additional review. Documents should accurately reflect transaction activity. Agreements should not be backdated, and executed documents should not be altered. Documentation should not be created after closing to address deficiencies. Accurate documentation helps protect both the agent and the brokerage. Fathom may review transaction files to ensure documentation is complete and accurate. Documentation may be requested to support the transaction record. Commission disbursements may be delayed until requested documentation is received. Providing requested documentation promptly helps prevent delays.
As we wrap up, let's review some best practices and key takeaways from everything that we've covered so far. Here are some common mistakes that you can avoid to ensure your transactions close smoothly. Things to avoid include waiting until closing week to submit the transaction, or uploading documents late in the transaction lifecycle. Missing documentation that supports the sales price or commission amount can also create delays. or executing representation agreements after providing brokerage services, or inconsistencies between documents that may require follow-up prior to closing. On the flip side, here are some best practices that can help you succeed. Be sure to create the transaction once representation is established. Upload documents as they are executed. Ensure the representation agreement reflects the final agreed compensation. Review transaction details for accuracy before submitting. Submit as early as possible when feasible. And respond promptly to requests for documentation or clarification. Beyond all those points, here are some final things that you can take away from this training. Execute representation agreements before providing brokerage services when required. Ensure that compensation is clearly documented and defined. Maintain an accurate and complete transaction file. Submit transactions as early as possible when feasible. Be sure to respond promptly to documentation requests or clarification. All of these things can help to prevent avoidable delays in commission processing and transaction closings. Following these expectations and abiding by those best practices help to create consistency across transactions and support clear compensation documentation. It promotes timely review and commission processing while helping to prevent avoidable delays. As always, clear documentation helps protect the client, the agent, and the brokerage. As always, thank you for taking the time to review this training video. We thank you for your attention and your focus. Consistent documentation practices, such as what we've identified here, help to create smoother transactions and support timely payment for all parties involved. If any questions arise, please ensure that you reach out to your local leadership in your market for any additional guidance. That's all we have time for today. Thank you, and we'll see you again soon.